When I was preparing for this message, I kept getting what I feel is something from the Lord that He wanted me to share some of my growing up. I'm pretty general about it. I kept making excuses why this was a bad idea. I started reasoning with it, and finally the Lord just really put it on me, so I decided I would share a little bit. And after I gave into the Lord, I understood what He was trying to do. When I grew up, my mom used to discipline us by beating me in a complete outright rage. She had like a 3-foot rule. If the spank didn't move you 3 feet, it wasn't a good spank. And if you tried to move away from her or run, because I thought that would be smart, believe it or not, she could actually make it worse. And she would beat you and beat you. I got beat just about every day, sometimes multiple times throughout the day. And she'd be in just a rage, screaming and yelling at me. Now, usually she'd catch my rear end, but it wasn't uncommon to get hit in the legs, the arms, the back. And I broke so many paddles, I can't even begin to count them. I learned also never to mess with my mother in the kitchen or the garage. And if you want later, I'll tell you the story of the fork, the hammer, and the saw. So, my dad, now on the other hand, was an alcoholic. He would drink probably between 1/5 of Jim Beam whiskey every night and get up and go to work and he only missed one day. My dad would spend the night yelling at you, belittling you, calling you names that I can't repeat, and you could not say a word. My dad was a Marine. I could not say a word. And he would just cruelly call you names. I can't even repeat some of them. And he would berate you every single night, and it would go on for hours. This is my childhood. And then finally I would go to bed, and I would go to bed with my mom and dad screaming at each other at the top of their lungs, yelling at each other, arguing, saying things that I couldn't even imagine repeating. And I would drift off to sleep. So I can pretty much sleep through anything. Now, to be fair, I dearly love my mom and my dad. I do. I love them with everything in my heart. My mom there was times where she could be very tender and very kind. And especially when my brothers left, I had 4 half-brothers. And then my dad, when we go fishing, we'd have some really good times. So I don't want to give you a wrong impression that I hate my parents. I love my parents dearly. They've passed up. But my upbringing led me to the realization that I had absolutely nothing to offer as a parent. I had no preconceptions or no ideas that I'd raise a kid right. I'm not kidding you. I had a fear. No, I had an absolute terror that I would destroy my children. I was scared to death to have kids. And when I had my daughter, that was a whole different thing because of where I grew up. The assessment and realization of my bankruptcy as far as my skills as a parent made me eager to break that cycle of abuse and alcoholism. I wanted more than anything to break that. I prayed to God. I sought out every Christian who had ever successfully raised their kids. I listened to every word they had to say. I talked to my pastor. I read every book you could imagine on them. Some were junk. But I read everything. And I read them with an open heart. Because I knew there was nothing I had to offer. And my wife and I decided to raise our children biblically, whether it made sense or not. We were going to do it the Bible, because my repertoire was out. If it was in the Bible, I figured God made the universe, that's good enough for me. My wife and I decided to put our children first, and make no mistake, a wife that will follow your lead is paramount. If you have division amongst you and your wife, the child will learn that obedience is negotiable. They will not respect authority, and they'll learn to work the weak parent. They will also learn how to subterfuge rules. Some of those kids that come to us, they can get around any rule. You watch them, they're magical. So no matter what the cost, I decided to quit my 60-plus hour a week job for a job that paid almost half. My wife quit her really nice paying job as an escrow secretary so that we could be home, so she could stay home and homeschool our children and raise our kids. Our lifestyle was changed dramatically. That's underlining in capitals. We went down to one car. We rarely went out. Our lifestyle was every week we didn't know how we'd even make bills half the time. But we felt this is what we wanted to do. We felt our kids were that important that we were going to do that. Gail homeschooled our children, and we served God, and we were in church every time the doors were open. This is not to brag, but to confess our utter dependence upon the Lord. I was involved in soul winning, bus ministry, and we had my children served by my side because our pastor said, if you want your kids to learn to serve God, serve. You lead, you serve. I didn't question, I just did it. I wasn't smart enough to have reasons. I invented this thing called a man day for Brock when he was growing up. Because you'll find out that boys won't just sit at a meal and tell you, they go, what? I'm fine. But a boy, when you do things with him, will open up. So we had a man day. We'd go work out in the morning, we'd go fishing, we'd have paintball, and sure enough, as we're doing stuff, he'd say, hey, Dad, and he'd start sharing stuff with me. So I learned that about my son. So we had a man day every week, and my son looked forward to it. Now my daughter, girls are different if you didn't know that. I didn't know that. I'm telling you, I started from zero. We had what we call a daddy night out. And I'm not talking about dressing up, and we'd go out on a date, and we would go out and get sometimes we couldn't afford a meal, so we'd get a donut. We'd get ice cream. I would shoplift. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. I'm just joking. And I would treat her a meal because girls will just talk across the table, and I would learn and hear what they had to say, and I would learn their hearts. With several decades of Christian service, I can honestly say that of all of the Christians I have fellowshiped with, and there have been quite a few over almost 3 decades, few have successfully raised or passed their faith on to their children. In fact, I'm not even sure I can fill one hand with the success stories. The other thing I can clearly remember in church is the excuses parents use to describe why their children are lost, rebellious, sinful, or immoral, or just abandoned their faith. I heard them say, it's a phase. Or they're strong-willed. No, you're weak-willed. My dad used to say, it's a war of wills and I will win. Trust me, he would. He said he could fix any kid in 15 minutes alone in a room. I saw that happen once. He punched that kid my brother for 15 solid minutes. You know how long that is to get punched around? And then he did this as he left. He goes, I took it easy. Next time we're doing 30 minutes, I'm not holding back. There's never a second lesson. I'm just saying. My father, I've also heard the children are ADD. They're ADHD. They have fetal alcohol syndrome. Or they have oppositional defiant disorder. I'm hearing Christians tell me this. They have a developmental disorder, or they're autistic. Or they have an antisocial personality disorder. Doesn't that sound cool? It sounds so clinical. And on and on and on and on I've heard these things parents use. Christians. Using worldly psychology to describe what caused their children to stray. Can we be honest? Basically, they're making an excuse for themselves for their failure to raise and protect and discipline their children. I'm going to be real honest with our family. Keep in mind, Freud had deep mother fixations were not healthy. If you're not familiar, Nietzsche was Hitler's favorite psychologist. If you've read his articles, you'd throw that guy out in a minute. And the history of psychology is deeply flawed. I'm really deeply burdened about raising of our children. I've sorrowed over this preaching because I have wept and sorrowed and prayed with so many parents that have lost their kids, and I can't get them out of my head. So if I'm hard, I apologize. But in the many years of watching parents make mistakes and trying to help them, they almost never listen. I've begged some of them when I saw them do something I knew would lead to their children's destruction. But Satan's so subtle. He will convince you, don't worry, they'll be all right. Or some other lie, like Satan said to Eve in the garden, "You shall surely not die." He whispers to parents in your ears, "Your children will turn out fine." Christian parents don't seem to realize that we're in a battle and the opposition wants to destroy and devour them. Not just mess them up. He wants to devour your children. Satan will seek every opportunity he can to deter you, to outflank you, to get you and your children in the wrong path. This is war. And you must raise them as you train a warrior, constantly teaching, instructing, correcting, and praying throughout the day. This is why, if you turn to Deuteronomy 6:7, just shows you I didn't know any better. When I would read a truth, I would take it to the extreme. Deuteronomy 6:7. Deuteronomy 6:7, "Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thy house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." And then Deuteronomy 11:19. "And ye shall teach them your children, speak of them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest down the way, when thou liest down, when thou risest up." So I took that and I said, that means every second I'm going to be teaching that child every lesson I can about the Bible every second. When we saw magazine wrecks, I'd tell them about the immorality of those things. When children were out and thing, I would tell them what sin that was. Every second I could pop something in their head. You think, well, that's stupid. I didn't know any better. I just did what the Bible said. When I saw movies that had an agenda, I'd say, "You know what they're teaching you here?" And I'd tell the kid right there. People thought I was nuts. I don't care. I used everything I could because I figured use everything you can to teach them the right thing. Because trust me, the world will teach them what you won't. Use everything. Whatever you leave unsaid or untaught, the world and Satan will fill in for you. I really believe that. Gail and I believed every word of instruction in the Bible because we're so smart or holy. No, because I knew who I was and how bankrupt I was. I knew what a sinner I was. I'm inside here, I can tell you. I know what a sinner I was. And I had nothing to offer. I'm the son of a waitress and a son of a butcher, not really high caliber quality material. And when we realize what a liar the world and the devil are, I at least knew not to trust my feelings, and especially not to trust the theology of the world. Do you know what the problem with the world is today? And even with Christians? We're willfully ignorant. We don't even try to learn. You see, you don't even see people try to search out the thing. We think what we don't know won't hurt you. You see it all the time, street preaching, the tract table. You try to get them to read, listen, or investigate. And read, forget it. They're just not going to do it.
Amen.
People just don't listen to facts anymore. But it also happens in church,
That's right.
in preaching. Benjamin Franklin said, "A nation of well-informed men who have taught to know and prize the rights which God has given them cannot be enslaved. It is in the region of ignorance that tyranny begins." Thomas Jefferson said, "If you expect a nation to be ignorant and free, you expect what never was and what can never be." That's how I know America's finished. I love this country. I'm a patriot, but this country's finished. You can't get people to read. You can't get them to learn. So let's start with the easy stuff. If you want your children to raise them right, you must first belt them. You had better be the one that believes in them. You'd better be the one that sees those spiritual things. When you see those spiritual qualities, like when I saw him coming to Aaron and Brian, I believe that's great. That's a good thing. And I would believe in them, show them. That's a good thing you're learning. I believe in you. That's something you can use to become to use to help for somebody. I would believe. The other thing you need to do is encourage them. If you don't encourage them, somebody else will. Yeah. When they went through hard times, I was side by side with them. You can get through this. This is what God's teaching you. You can do this. You can learn this. You need to love them. That means you look them in the eyes, you hold them, you love them, you tell them the words, I love you. I rarely heard that as a child. And next, you need to teach, train, and take time. I just didn't have 3 T's. Thought it would be kind of funny there. So you need to be teaching and taking the time to train them and taking time with them. You have to spend time with your children. Alone, together, focused on them. These 3 things, whatever you don't do with one of those, somebody else would. And I taught my kids, I prayed for them a lot. I prayed thousands of times. I prayed during the day when they're going through trials and tough times. I fasted for them. Both of my kids went through some really unfair stuff going through Christian school. And I told them, it's good that you learn this, and I tried to encourage them that what's God teaching you, you can learn through this, and I tried to apply all the Bible to this unfair situation that they learned to handle it. I says, but you have to respect that authority, even if he's unfair. If you can learn this now, it will help you in the future, and it has. I also went to the teachers, unbeknownst to them, and talked to them. I had all my facts together. I thought they'd listen to me. They didn't. I said, but no matter if you change or not, my children are taught to be obedient to you, and they will obey you whether you're fair or not, because there's a testimony there. My daughter was treated mercilessly as a Christian girl having a walk. I mean, if you want to hear a story, and it broke my heart, and we had to help her, encourage her through that, love her through that, teach her what the Bible is doing. Believe in her, you can get through this. It was also. But remember to pray for your kids. And I mean, I prayed for them so much throughout the day. Fasted. Yeah. I have a book that I read, and it's by Ken Ham and Britt Beamer. And Britt Beamer is a pollster. And he polled throughout this book extensively where children from conservative fundamental churches were polled what the root causes, why they abandoned their faith, and they examined all the reasons why to determine why these kids were abandoning their faith and leaving church. This thing shocked me to the core, because this is us. This is not the contemporary churches. This is us, the fundamental people. You know, the people know truth and all that stuff. Here's what they found out. 60% of the children from churches like ours will abandon their faith. So count your children. Which one are you going to allow to go to hell? 6 out of 10 from churches like ours. Here's the other thing they found polling these kids, that most of them have decided long before reaching adulthood, while living in your home, that they've abandoned the faith. So think about that. It doesn't take long to figure out those numbers. They'll stink. I got that book if you want to use it. I also found some other things. 80% of the children, Christian children from churches like ours, that attend public schools or what I call government indoctrination centers, will abandon their faith. The remaining 20% will be wallpaper Christians. What's that, Virgil? That means they'll fit in with every philosophy the world has. So if you have kids and you leave in public school, I had to erase a lot of stuff that I wanted to say about public school, because I'm really passionate about this. There's a lot of them. There's Paige. No, can't say that. That's too harsh. Now, If your kids from Christian churches like this go to a college, 95% of them will abandon their faith. Isaiah is a very rare person. When you first came, and you know what, he kind of holds the key to it. If you know that he's been grounded, he knows how to defend himself. In the Bible, it states in Proverbs 22:6, I'm pretty stupid and obvious, so it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Let me ask you this. Have you ever seen when soldiers join the army that they send them out in battle and then train them while they're out in battle? Hey, look out for that. Don't step on that. That'd be immoral. You would lose most of your troops. And so is sending your child to a public school. We're to train them up, then send them out when they're ready. You don't send your children into a pack of wolves, do you? It's like people that come up to where we live with domesticated animals, and they think they can let them out with wild animals. We have coyotes, mountain lions, bears. It takes about a month for those to become food. You don't send somebody a child in that. This other fact that I found out, that they polled kids, they discovered, after polling all these kids from our churches, that the average Christian child will be questioned just 3 times on their faith, or an article of faith. And when they can't defend themselves, they've been taught to train themselves, they'll be embarrassed and humiliated by the people in the world, and they will abandon their faith forever. 3 times is all it takes. When I heard that, it scared me dead. I got serious. I figured it's not going to be because of a lack of effort on our part. I'm just a dumb old boy. Maybe a dumb old abused boy. But we were going to do everything we could so that when somebody had challenged him, now my kids, they'll fight you. I like Luke's spirit. He's an unusual boy. Go ahead and cross sabers with him. I don't even want to do it. It's embarrassing when a young guy hands you your lunch. You did a good job. All your kids. Here's something else I discovered. They further discovered that children that attend Sunday schools abandon their faith at a much higher rate and are easier to convert to the worldly philosophy. So I started reading and doing some studies on this. Why is that, I wondered? Well, Satan is not stupid. He knows this is a battle. Let me explain one technique they showed me, how they do it, that can change your children's perception in less than 10 minutes. Here's how it goes. This is an actual lesson from an atheist teacher. The teacher was teaching on evolution. Little Johnny raises his hand and goes, hey, God created the earth in Genesis and all that. And he tries to defend his faith. So the teacher said, where did you learn that? Sunday school? And he says, the teacher says to all the kids, what do they teach you in Sunday school? Bible stories, right? Jonah the whale, this stuff. What are stories? They're fairy tales to make you good and obedient. In one lesson, they can change probably 90% of the kids right there. In one short lesson, that your child has learned that the church and the Bible is a fairy tale and is used for you to be for teaching the truth and you to be a nice person. But science and schools have the real truth. See how evil this is? This is evil. The Bible and church is certainly not to be trusted. It's just a fairy tale. The polls of young children were overwhelming on this. And this is only one of the multitudes of techniques they will use in your child every day, day in, day out, 8 hours or 6 or 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. Our Sunday schools, unfortunately, were made for a far more innocent age. Today we need to ground our children in truth, doctrine, and tell them how to defend themselves. I taught my kids about worldly philosophy and how to defend it. I'm such a nerd. I talked about politics. I talked about everything. My kids are like poor things. They probably need counseling. Now, if you have your children in a public school or you're teaching in public, be intellectually honest enough to find out what is going on. I read a lot. I read a lot. And one of the best books I've ever read for the education system, for the history and where there's crimes of the educators. I have this book. You can have it, but don't take it if you're not going to read it. And read it all the way through. It will amaze you how the schools were changed from, we took examples from Frankfurt and Leipzig, Germany. Dewey wanted to change them into citizens of the world, and how the Marxist theology began almost 100 years ago. Satanist, atheist ideology. This is probably one of the best books. I've read dozens and dozens of books. This is probably the best. So read it. I have a quote that I use to people, Christians. I say, a true Christian patriot doesn't send his child to Benedict Arnold for an education and expect to get back George Washington. Doesn't that seem kind of obvious? I'm pretty dumb, I guess. The Bible warns about seeking counsel from the godless. If you go to Isaiah 31:3, and there's the whole Old Testament is filled with God warning Israel not to go to the other countries for counsel. 31:1 Isaiah. Woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses and trust in chariots, because they are many or educated, or they're so smart, and horsemen because they're very strong, but they look not to the Holy One of Israel, and they'll seek the Lord. And if you go throughout the Bible, I didn't want to, there's probably, you could go through the Old Testament where God warns people about going to the world. This is also why you must keep your children away from worldly friendships. We have a friend that pastor knows, dear to us, that she's lost her kids because she let them around relatives that were scorners and haters of God. We didn't even allow our children to play with unsaved worldly children or even straying children in our church. Why? Because we're protecting their soul.
That's right.
You don't like it? I don't care.
Amen. That's correct.
I'll fight you for it. Oh. We protect. I remember telling us, your homeschool children won't be socialized.
Yeah.
I told them, I don't want your socialization. You're burying a children at a rate never before recorded in human history. The sin of perversion, no thanks. You go ahead and ruin your children. I said, I see on my bus ministry, I see every week car washes for dead kids. And you're worried about me socializing my child. You must also show that children are worth protecting and fighting for. I'm going to tell you a story. You may disagree with me, but that's why I would. My kids, if they're going to learn to fight, and they know things they better fight to protect for their children and for other things, you're going to have to teach them. My kids, when they would get in, like Brock, if he was having trouble with a young boy or whatever, I let them fight their own battles. Says, you whoop him. That's what I would do. I didn't want him being where he couldn't defend himself. I took my son to martial arts because there was a big kid picking on him. He kicked him in the face and broke his glasses.
Wow.
The Christian principal called me in and says, hey, the parents are really mad. Your son broke his glasses. Well, the kid's a bully. I says, I'll pay for his glasses. And he says, well, he wants you. I said, no, my son has been taught that next time he won't just kick him, he's going to pummel him. And if the parent has problems with that, you tell him to call me. I'll meet him wherever he wants. That's right. We had a kid up the street with his parents. His dad was a big guy. He cursed, was drunk. It was a bully. And I used to tell my son to take care of him, but one day he was up there and the father got involved. Okay, it's time for dad. It's time to teach a lesson to my son. I wasn't trying to show off. I went out there and I told the kid, says, you're not allowed on this side of the street anymore. He says, why? I says, because you are a loudmouth, you're a bully, you cuss, and I don't like it. He says, well, I'll tell my dad. I was waiting for him to say that. I says, that's fine. You tell your dad that I said he's a loser, a big mouth, a drunk, and a cuss person, and I don't ever want to hear from him ever again. His eyes got real big. He goes, my dad's going to kick your rear end. I says, good. I said, I live right there. You tell him I'll be expecting him. I say, that Virgil, that's controversial. So I took my son, whose eyes were like big as... and I sat in the recliner next to the window so I could see him coming. My son sat there like, he didn't even move. His eyes were like this big, waiting for that big old bully to come down the street. I took out the Bass Pro Shops catalog. You know, it's about this thing. An hour later, I went through that whole catalog. The guy didn't show up. My son learned something. He's worth protecting. I said, hey, let's go out in the street and go play football. He goes, Dad, you want to go out there? The guy will see us. You darn right I want to go out there. You bet your sweet bippy I do. Now he said, now Virgil, what would have happened if that guy would have came down? We'd have went out in the street, in the middle of the street, and we'd have a knockdown, drag out, claw, bite, fight, and finish right out in the middle of the street. Oh, that's not very Christian, Virgil. I'm sorry, you raise your kids your way, I'll raise them my way. What happened if that guy would have beat you up? I would have still got up every time I could till my legs could no longer, I would make him beat me senseless so my kids know they're worth protecting. Amen. That was what it was all about. It wasn't about me showing off. It's about showing my kids they're worth fighting for. When America started to go bad 30 years ago, I didn't just sit in my couch and complain. My kids need to know that things are worth fighting for. I got involved. I was a party official in the Republican Party. I was the president of American Family Association chapter in Ventura. I've worked on so many petitions and government things and went to so many things, and my kids have been at my side and watched me do that. I want to know that they need to get out and fight. You're not going to get a leader by just sitting back. You're going to have to show them. There's some blessings regarding children that are biblically in Psalms 127:3. Now I chose not to tell you about the time the two kids tried to start a gang with their gang parents. That would be best outside the pulpit, I'm thinking. That was a little intense. Psalms 127. Where is it? I can't seem to find it. There it is, 127. 3-5. Lo, children are heritage of the Lord, and are the fruit of the womb are his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of his youth. And Proverbs 15:11 again talks through about some blessings about kids. Proverbs 15. Hell and destruction are before the Lord. How much more then the hearts of children of men? Isn't that neat that your children are before the Lord? So let's get to it. If you're going to raise your children for God and not depart from the faith and be strong, I will warn you, you can't be haphazard or lackadaisical. God has blessed you and entrusted you to raise them for him. Really, they're his children. To be strong in the faith, to be warriors for Christ. Have you ever witnessed a Marine gunny? They're intense, aren't they? Why does you notice a gunny doesn't indulge them? He demands obedience and discipline. It has a type of intensity that focuses on producing results. He trains them hard. Why does he train them so hard? Because he knows the battle's hard. Yeah. So is a life given over to sin.
Amen.
Those are his children. Don't you dare play games with them. This is not a time to be self-indulgent or selfish. I'm amazed at how many homes with large adults are run by children, with the parents responding and appeasing every time the child whines or yells. It's just, who's in charge? You're the adult. Are you going to let your child push you around? More often than not, this is what I see in Christian homes. So first, you must be an example or a standard, because whatever you do as a parent in moderation, your child will do in excess. If you occasionally drink, your child most likely will be a drunkard or an addict. If you watch racy shows with them or around them, they'll probably be into pornography. If you stretch the truth occasionally, parents have reasons for lying. Your kid will probably be a liar. If you have a moderate commitment to life, your child will ignore your faith. He knows better. If you choose in what doctrine of the Bible you follow and ignore in preaching the Bible, your children would choose to ignore your faith in you. Now, some of you have children. Some of you will have children. Some of you get married, like the Mikes. Some of you have grandchildren. My daughter. I'm just trying to help you. So
God answers prayer.
This message is for more than just few people. If you're a grandparent, you got some. Your children can see a fraud. They can see right through you. If you want them to be wholly separated and be a blessing, you're going to have a real, authentic walk. You're going to have to be serving. Remember, whatever is weak in your life, your child will duplicate and, more importantly, exaggerate. That terrified me when I learned that principle. I have so many weak spots. I go, my kids don't have a chance. Second, your children must learn to respect and, yes, fear you. Turn to Proverbs 14:26. Proverbs 14:26. In the fear of the Lord is strong confidence, and his children shall have a place of refuge. Genesis 18:19. For I know him that he will command his children, his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord and to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of. Leviticus 19:3. There it is, 19:3. Leviticus 19:3. Ye shall fear every man his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. If your child does not respect you, and yes, even fear you, here's the scary part. They will never learn to fear and respect God.
That's right.
This is serious. You will teach your child that obedience to God and the Bible is optional. Children need to be taught to obey immediately. What we learned was first-time obedience. There's no second. There's no negotiation. There's no nagging, no begging, no cajoling, no threatening. And never appease a child. It's bad behavior. Appeasement is poison. It's like giving drugs to an addict. You're rewarding bad behavior and teaching them that you are weak and they can do whatever they want. And on a greater scale, that God will let them slide without consequences. That's a very dangerous principle to do to your child. And very soon, you will have a tyrant on your hands. And when they become a teenager, they will become uncontrollable. Go ahead and doubt me on it. I'll sorrow with you later. I will. Children should be made to obey. It's expected to obey and respond immediately. Do not accept bad attitudes, whining, rebellion. Warn them, then whoop them if they don't properly respond. I know you can't say that anymore. I see too many Christians who are afraid to death to spank their child enough to bring them to pain. I see these little love taps. It's like, you don't understand. What made me spank them when I was afraid to hit my kids because of me is I knew that if I didn't bring them to repentance and break their will, that I was not being a good parent. Tell them to change their attitude or they will be corrected and disciplined. They will never learn the consequences of sin, and spanking, if you don't know, helps remove the guilt from a child's conscience. Did you know that? That's why so many kids are angry today. They don't have that guilt. Their guilt builds up. A child is born with a desire for justice. Believe it or not. And it teaches them that you love them enough to correct them. That's why indulged or spoiled children are so angry. The guilt builds up in them. You have to adjust their attitudes. You know that you have their respect when you look at them a certain way. My dad could look at any child just about with those eyes of death, and you knew he was not to be messed with. Do anybody remember that? You have parents like that, they look at you, and you knew he wasn't bluffing. He will knock you out. My dad would knock you out. My mom would just beat you around the room until you got... I see so many children disrespect they yell at them, hit them, whine at them, throw temper tantrums, and the parent rewards the bad behavior. Great job, Mom and Dad. You just taught them that sin pays. I see children interrupt their parents when they're talking to them. I've even seen them grab their parents' face and turn it to them. Demanding you pay attention to me. That teaches them to be selfish, self-absorbed, teaches the child to be selfish and that everyone should serve them and that they're owed. And that they're the most important, not mom, not dad, and certainly not God. You're teaching a very dangerous precedent. That everyone should respond to their wishes, and when people don't do what they wish, it's their fault. You see it's a bigger principle here. They learn to blame others. It destroys the heart for others, and being a servant also makes them angry and act out when they don't get their way. Here's another bad thing. It will inoculate them from receiving correction from preaching or from trials they may go through. You ever wonder why we have so many sissy girl churches nowadays, contemporary churches? Now you know why. We taught our children the interrupt rule. What's that? Does anybody know what the interrupt rule is? When we were talking with somebody, our kids didn't get to interrupt us. We would be talking, let's say I'm talking to you. We're in a conversation, my daughter and my son would come up and they put their hand on my hand or my wife's hand. And I'd put my hand on theirs to let them know I acknowledged them. That means when I'm done, I'll talk to you. The important thing is when you're done, afterwards, I got down on my knees, looked them straight in the eyes, and we talked. I let them know that it was important, that they had my undivided attention. Dad, I pooped my pants. Oh, okay. But it teaches them, again, you're trying to teach principles to your child. And every single time your child challenges your authority or the rebellious, that needs to be responded every time with a negative response. Their very soul and character is at stake. This can be time-consuming to correct a child properly, especially if they've been getting away with disobedience for a while. But isn't their soul and their destiny in heaven worth it? Now for the hard part, where most Christians fail: discipline. The Bible speaks of some rewards that disciplines brings. If you go to Proverbs 29:17, Proverbs 20, correct thy son, and he shall give thee rest. Yea, he shall give delight unto your soul. So if you want peace and order in your house, discipline your child and correct bad or rebellious behavior, or the Bible tells you, you'll have no peace or no rest. Proverbs 29:15 says, The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother shame. Now, we never spanked our children with our hands. We believe that hands are for loving. We use an instrument to adjust their attitude. This is a little thick for me. You have to be very careful with something that thick. We'd use like a bamboo spoon or something. But the hands were always for loving, so that when we put out our hands, kids wouldn't flinch like I would with my parents.
That's right. Amen, brother.
But if I knew they came for this, okay, I'm getting it. And it's going to be a long session, let me tell you. We spanked to bring repentance. We would tell them the sin that they'd broken or the rule. Listen, you can't yell and scream at me and cuss me. And we'd tell them, you've sinned and you need to be punished. And we'd spank them to the point where we broke their will. They cried. They were repentant. Then we'd say, we love you, we care for you, but we can't let you sin that way. It takes a while to have a session like that. And sometimes there's days when it seems like your whole day is filled with sessions. But our kids are worth it. This scared me to death. If you turn to Proverbs 19:18, now I'm reliving some stuff. When I read this scared me to the core. Proverbs 19:18. Read this very carefully. Chasten thy son while there is hope. You see that? While there's hope. And let not thy soul spare for his crying. Don't spare. Isn't it amazing how the Bible seems to have instructions for every situation? He knew as parents, myself and my wife, we're going to feel sorry for that child when he cries. But did you see that warning voice? That's what kept me true to it. Well, there's hope. There's a point where there's no longer hope for correcting your child.
That's right.
And you know what? Do you want to test the boundaries of where that is? I'll tell you, for most of the parents I know that have lost their children, it's far younger than they thought. You will lose your child. There's no hope. That resounded in my memory. So I stayed strong to disciplining my child because I didn't want them to not have hope. The longer you allow a child to have his or her way without consistent correction and discipline, the longer it takes and the more resolve it takes to bring him back to obedience. Hebrews 12:11, we'll go over there. Talks about the peaceable fruit of righteousness. Boy, God, the Bible has everything, it amazes me. Now, no chastening for the present seemeth joyous, it's not, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. So do you want peace and joy in your home? Discipline your child consistently every time there's rebellion. And yes, it's going to be inconvenient. Sometimes we're going to be really frustrated. I know this is inconvenient, time consuming, but again, your child's soul is worth it. Or your home will have no peace, no joy, and your home will become a living hell. But one thing is for certain, you will have no rest and you'll have no peace. This verse also instructs you not to withhold discipline. If anything, err on the side of over-disciplining. Proverbs 23:13-14. We'll go back to good old Proverbs. I think that's in the Old Testament. 23:13 and 14. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest them with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. Did I read that right? That by not disciplining, you can deliver your child's soul to hell? I'm just reading what it's saying. If you're not consistent with discipline, the child learns they don't need to obey God or the Bible. They can pick and choose. So think of this way. Every time you let Junior get by a rebellion to sin, you're just basically walking him down to the devil. Here you go, Satan. You play with him for a while. I'll be back for him. I'm sorry, I don't want to leave him with the devil at all. Do you know something else I learned? That children that are not disciplined with corporal punishment become stupid. Proverbs 22:14 on that talks about folly. You can look up the words folly. Proverbs 15. Proverbs. I'm having trouble finding verses this morning. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. So I looked up all kinds of verses on folly and children. I'm not going to give them all because I didn't want to be too long. But I looked up the word folly in Webster's 1828. Do you know what it says? Weakness of intellect, imbecility of mind, want of understanding. So if you want to make your child stupid, unteachable, and able to learn, understand, indulge them and appease them, don't discipline them consistent with authority. I find it funny that our world can't understand why there's an epidemic of learning disorders. It's right there in the Bible. The Bible clearly explains it. That's why children that are spoiled speak at a much later age and at an immature level, because they've been taught they don't need to talk. They can just act out, whine, yell, have a temper tantrum, and the parent will immediately respond. He doesn't need to form words. Again, this teaches them that others are there to serve them, that they're the most important person, and that basically the child becomes almost kind of an idol, with the parents serving in obeisance to them. Oh, by the way, it teaches them they don't need to it teaches them that when they don't get their way, to act out, rebel, and become almost impossible to teach or learn the difficult lessons of life. You'll regret this when they become teenagers, and you'll have a lot of sorrow. It also demonstrates to a child that truth's not important, and not to stand for it, because you can't even stand up to a child. There's some other verses on discipline in Hebrews 12:5 through 11, Colossians 3 through 20. I don't know if I have time to go through those, but I don't even remember what those. I remember reading them, but 12:5 through 11. And have you forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as children? My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, no faint when thou art rebuked him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son he received. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if you be without chastisement, whereof all you are partakers, then you are bastards, not son. So, and then we turn to Colossians 3:20. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. One last thing is Proverbs 13:24. This is a hard one. I warn you. Love you guys and your children. 13:24. You probably know this one. He that spareth his rod. That's not saying you don't. That's did you spare it? You don't do it enough. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasten him but betimes. So if you spare or hold back on discipline, you hate your child. I didn't say that. That's pretty hard to me. The Bible said it. Let me repeat. If you don't hate your child, that's scary stuff. And that you apparently don't love them? Wow, that's hard. What does B times mean? Again, Webster's 1828 says, in good season or time, before it's too late, in a short time. In other words, immediately. Don't wait, threaten, or yell, or discipline them. Just discipline them. I do have a caveat. Sometimes a parent will raise a child in nurture and admonition of the Lord, and to my eyes, and as far as I can tell, they've done everything perfectly correct. And their child will go astray. I wish I had a Bible verse. I wish I could understand it. I know that Romans 8:28 says all things work together. I just don't understand how it works sometimes, Lord. It's way above me. I don't know why God allows this to happen. I just don't know. I assume person got in there, influenced. I don't know. So I don't want you to have the impression that every time a child goes astray, it's because sometimes, I don't know the reason. It's beyond my ability to understand. But I do know one thing. Enabling won't get them back. If you do that, you'll lose the rest of your children trying to go after them. There's a family here that has done an incredible job with a child. I don't want to embarrass them, but I just have never seen somebody handle something so biblically in my life. Other than our pastor, my first pastor, we first were saved out of the Catholic Church, went to a Baptist church. His daughter, his pride and joy, got mixed up with a Mormon boy, and they wanted to get married. And he announced this at church one day. And his wife came up beside him and stood with him and says, we had to break fellowship with our daughter. We can't do this. We can't be a part of it. We told her, and everybody just says, well, just go along. You know, it's better to be in... And he says, no, I cannot do it. And he broke fellowship with her. And a lot of Mormons tried to get him. And to make a long story short, my pastor and his wife were crushed over this. I never seen a man weep from the pulpit like that. But a few months later, he led that young boy to the Lord. Do you know they're missionaries now? Baptist missionary. And let me tell you, when they got married and he did perform weddings, the Mormons didn't show up. Isn't that funny? They know how to stand for things. Some other examples from the Bible to avoid. If you have favorites, like you have a child that's first time obedient, does all the right things, you have to be careful not to be a favorite to that child because it'll make the other children bitter. Don't reason with sin. Like Samson's parents, when Samson wanted the Philistine woman, his father and his mother said to him, is there never a woman amongst the daughters of thy brethren, or among all thy people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? It made perfect sense, right? He didn't listen to that. You can't reason with... He said, get her for me if she pleases me well. You can't reason with sin or lust. It has to be corrected. So don't try to reason with a kid. And don't yell at him like Eli. I'm sure Eli was yelling. My thing is when he was telling us, when he told his two sons that were committing evil as priests, and he said to them, why do you do such things? I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. Nay, my sons, it is no good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people to transgress. Did he remove them? Did he do anything? No, he let them go on. He yelled at them. Let me tell you something from somebody that was possibly what you'd call abused. Correct them calmly and explain their sin. Yelling at them and calling them names just makes me feel that you're mad. It's not my thing. And to be honest, as much as my parents yelled at me, I thought they hated my guts. I really did. When I grew up, for most of my life, I thought my parents hated me. I'm going to ask you something. Actually, I'm going to get on my knees. I'm going to beg you to have enough courage to discipline and correct your child, to be willing to let them be angry and even hate you at times to correct their souls, to be consistent Your children can't speak. Don't discard this message or discount it or throw it away. I'm just a humble person, but I'm begging you on behalf of your children to have the courage to be a parent, to do the tough stuff, and it's tough. I'm begging you. Now, most likely, you'll discard or discount or find some loophole and not follow this teaching or the instruction of the Bibles, and you'll do it your way. And years down the line, when your child goes astray and you're bailing them out of jail, and I've been with parents there, or your kids are overdosed. We had one kid almost die. And they have their third child out of wedlock. I'll be here for you. In fact, call me first. I'll sorrow with you. I'll pray for you. I'll pray with you. I will love you and I will lift you up. I've started with far too many Christians to count. And when that time comes, I won't tell you, I told you so. I won't point out where you failed or where you went wrong. I won't rub it in your face. I won't say a word. I will just be there for you. And when you use the worldly excuses, I won't correct you. I'll just be there for you. I'll pray for you. I'll love for you. Because there will be no need for me to tell you I told you so. One last thing. I ask that you forgive me if I've been harsh or I came across too negative. I love all of you. I didn't mean to do that. This is born from sorrow that I've seen right before my eyes with kids. And if I came off wrong, I beg your forgiveness. I'm sorry I was harsh. But children can't speak up and tell you where you're going wrong. They just have to live with the consequences. And I ask your forgiveness if I insulted you and went too far.